Hello everyone, I'm AnthroFiend and I do horror-related things on the internet, and I am on spring break right now, nearing the end, but on spring break, so I am back in my old room again. Finally got that Carmilla review up, so I am at long last making new content. But before I get into what that is, I just want to say thank you for getting me to the number of the beast. I woke up this morning, looked at my YouTube channel, and saw that I had hit 666 subscribers, so yay, hail Satan or whatever. But anyway, I am all vamped up today. It's almost been a whole year since I've been vamped up like this for my reviews of The Vampire Lovers and Lust for a Vampire and that contest entry I did for Raven Wednesday, but I am bringing it back because what I'm reviewing today, if you've seen the title of this video, you already know, but appropriate, as you've probably already seen, unless you're new here, in which case please go check those videos out. I, back in February, interviewed the writer-director and two cast members of the recently produced Carmilla radio play, and not too long ago uploaded my review of the same radio play. The aforementioned writer-director, David McDowell Blue, reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to review his play adaptation of Dracula called Wings of Dracula. And of course I said yes, because look at me. Would I even own any of these things if I was not a vampire freak? This is an interesting production because it was done over Zoom. I believe it can be done other ways, but the production he gave me to view is a recording of one that was done over Zoom. This production was directed by Starina Johnson and performed in February of 2021 for the 90th anniversary of the Bela Lugosi Dracula movie. The plot is essentially Dracula, a ship called I pronounce it the Demeter, they call it the Demeter in the play, ends up running aground in Whitby, where it was headed anyway, but there's not really anybody on the ship except for one guy, and he's dead. And some people have been saying they saw something that looked like a winged angel of death leave the ship. But it is up to our intrepid crew of Englishmen and women to put a stop to the vampire who has come to Whitby and is biting people and drinking their blood. It's Dracula. I don't know what else to tell you. It's Dracula. It's a little different, but the plot is essentially Dracula, so I don't need to do any kind of in-depth synopsis, even though I kind of just did. One thing I think this did that was really well done was it was done via Zoom, and I wasn't really sure how you were going to do Dracula like that, but all of the performers had green screens behind them, and those were projecting the backgrounds of whatever the different settings they were in were. And everything was set up so that you could have part of the backgrounds of the beach where the Demeter has run aground behind, say, Arthur Holmwood, and a little bit of it behind Quincy Morris. And I'm not going to say it looks natural, but they don't just copy and paste, oh, here's the background for the beach where the Demeter ran aground. They've got little different configurations or parts of the background for each person, and I thought that was well done. And the way they've blocked things allows people to interact with each other even though they're not in the same room. Dracula can bite somebody, or someone can stab somebody else, and you don't see it the way you'd see it in a movie or a stage play, but it's blocked in such a way that the implication is there and the illusion as it is works. And character-wise, I am going to go through all of the characters and what I thought of them, because this kind of harkens back to like the original stage play, like Dean Balderston version of Dracula in some ways, in that it is more or less contained in London. And by more or less, I mean that it is contained in London. There are implications of what happened before with Jonathan, but we don't go to Transylvania with Jonathan. We start in London with Jack Seward and Arthur Holmwood and Quincy Morris and all of those people waiting for Jonathan to arrive, and they're all in their houses or in the sanatorium or walking on the beach or at Carfax or wherever it needs to be. It's fairly contained in London, and as such, the cast is pared down to pretty much the core cast of the story. Because of that, I'm going to go in depth with all these characters because I love Dracula and its many different incarnations, and I have opinions on all of these characters, so I'm going to talk about all of them because I can. So firstly, we've got a character who might have been in Stoker's book. If she was, I don't remember her, but she isn't a character who I think, if she is from Stoker's book, is included in many adaptations, and that is Miss Reed, who is an attendant at Dr. Seward's sanatorium, looks after Renfield a lot, and she has this very interesting connection with Lucy and cares a lot for Renfield and talks to Jack and helps him to realize more or less what's going on. And there's all of this stuff about her past with Lucy and the two of them growing apart. And I don't know if it was intentional, but it almost seemed like there was like a little bit of an implied romantic relationship there. That might just be my queer brain reading things into everything, but it also might not be. She was very well played. I don't really have as many thoughts on her just because she's a character that's more or less new to me, but she's well acted. I liked her, and I liked the part she played in the story. And I believe I said she was played by Alana J. Webster. If I did not say that already, I'm sorry. I'll be listing the cast member who played each part in this production as I go. Dr. Seward, as played by Lucas Alifano, is really fun. I really enjoyed him. He's got this mask of politeness thing going on where it's very clear that he has something that he wants to say, but he's not cutting to the chase because he's dancing around it by being so polite. Like there's a scene where Renfield somehow knows things about Dr. Seward's past, and he has no idea how Renfield would know any of these things, except that maybe an attendant at the asylum told these things to Renfield. So he brings in Miss Reed and is like, you've been employed here how many years? And you take the time to converse with all of the patients. That's very, very commendable of you. However, I do not know how these things made their way into gossip and how you caught wind of them, but I simply can't let you spread gossip about me to my patients. Instead of just being like, how did you know this stuff and why did you tell it to Renfield? He takes a long time to dance around it in a way that I appreciated. It was fun to watch. Yeah, it was clearly just him wanting to say this outright, but being like, no, I gotta back off. I gotta be polite. And Miss Reed being like, please just cut to the chase, dude. The other thing I really enjoyed about Seward in this version is he has this love of religion and mythology and other cultures on top of his love of and his calling to science. So he opens the production by speaking into his dictaphone and being like, today is Thursday, whatever date it is. Thursday indeed. We've had horrible thunderstorms all day. And he has this little collection of religious artifacts from different cultures that they end up going back to at some point. And that also plays into the wings motif that they have going on in the story, because he has this little statue of, I think it's a Baal, which he describes as, in Egyptian culture, this is what someone's soul ascending to their version of heaven would look like. And it figures into the story in other ways, but I'm a mythology nerd. So I appreciated that Dr. Seward was too. It was just cool. And then Renfield, played by Renee Debevoise. I butchered that. I know I did. I'm sorry. But Renee's performance as Renfield is really cool, and one of the most different versions of Renfield I've ever seen, and that's not just because Renfield is a woman in this version, which is different, but that is not the most significant difference about this Renfield. The most significant difference about this Renfield that I thought was really cool is that she, as much as I love like Dwight Fry in the Lugosi movie, who's just reveling in his madness and is like, flies? Who wants to eat flies? Not when you can get nice fat spiders. This Renfield is the opposite. This Renfield can taste blood in her mouth all the time and finds herself having cravings for blood, but wants nothing to do with them, is perpetually repulsed by them, and is constantly quoting the Bible and Christian things like the Lord's Prayer to herself. She just has this absolute, I wouldn't say self-loathing, but this absolute horror of the thing she's turning into, and just this repulsion of, no, I don't want this. Why are these things in my head? I don't understand why this is happening to me. She just looks on the brink of tears all the time. She's a very tragic figure. And again, as much as I love like Dwight Fry, scenery chewing Renfield, this Renfield is just super sad. And everybody's always like, how do you know that, Renfield? Why do you taste blood? What are these dreams about? And she's like, I don't know. What is happening to me? Please help me. And she has this conviction that she's never going to make it out of the asylum, which, yeah. And the other really cool thing about this Renfield is she's more or less a mind reader. She'll see into people's heads. Again, she knows all this stuff from Seward's past that she just has no way of knowing. The same with anyone she interacts with. Similar things will kind of come out in her dreams. She more or less predicts Dracula's arrival, which again is in line with the book, but is presented in a very different way because she never refers to Dracula as the master, and she's always looking to God for help, but she is alerted to Dracula's presence by these visions she's having. And the way she speaks changes depending on whose thoughts she's reading. And not just in terms of mannerisms, but there's a scene where Dracula visits Renfield and she starts speaking in his Hungarian accent. And I thought that was really cool. So really unique version of Renfield. I liked her a lot. Mina in this version is very spunky and still very much, you know, upstanding Victorian woman, and very much the character she is in the book, where she's a part of the action and is doing everything she can to help them achieve their goal of defeating Dracula. But she's even more of an active role in this version. She is the one who translates the logbook from the Demeter. They're like, oh, great, this thing is in German. What are we going to do? And she's like, I know German. And they're like, yeah, sure, textbook German. This was written by a sailor. And she's like, oh, my family are sailors. This person's a sailor and this person's I know what this sounds like. And they're like, I don't know. And she's like, hand it over. I'll translate it. And she translates the whole thing. So I love that she has this even more active role in things, whether anyone else likes it or not. Dracula never phases her once in this version. She's not, you know, a perfect, invincible character. She still has these moments of vulnerability, but she has an especially active role in this version, which I liked. And I believe I said that Mina was played by Holly Hinton, but if I forgot, there it is again. Quincy Morris in this is played by Holger Moncala Jr., and he is the beloved cowboy we know from the book. He is the American of the group. I kind of hear him in my head saying what this is kind of an out of left field reference, but Lefty from Texas Chainsaw Massacre says, speak plain, saves time. And that's very much what I'm getting from Quincy Morris. He's just very to the point. He doesn't dance around things the way, I mean, Seward especially, but Homewood as well kind of do. He's very much to the point and is just like, how did you get those bite marks on your neck? Please tell me exactly how you did right now. There's not a ton different that they're doing with Quincy in this that hasn't been done in other adaptations besides him, you know, actually being in it, which doesn't happen often with rare exceptions, but I liked this version of him. Lucy, played by Beth Ninsel, is already dying at the beginning of this story. And in some ways, she is the one who sets all of this in motion because she is the one who sells Carfax to Dracula. She is kind of the one who handles a lot of the monetary stuff. She talks about her own will and changing that and what belongs in what person's hands. She knows she's dying and she's bitter about certain things because mostly people just treating her differently because they know she's dying, because she's just like, please let me walk on the beach. I'm not going to be able to do that anymore when I'm dead. So let me do things, please. And there's this slight hint of the polyamory that I feel like was always there in the original story, where she's just like, I wish I could just marry all three of them. And then when she becomes a vampire, there's this interesting aspect where she appears to Homewood in men's clothing, and she's just like, I always wanted to try dressing up like a man, which felt very Gabrielle from The Vampire Lestat to me. I might have misheard, but when she is biting Homewood. I think she says, "You can call me Quincy if you like." So I hadn't noticed it until that moment, but there seemed to be some really interesting implications there. Jonathan Harker, played by Roshan Matthews here, is one of my favorite Jonathan Harkers right now. He's not the very stuffy Englishman foil to the graceful romantic vampire that we get in a lot of versions. He's just deeply concerned for everyone and has this just absolute devotion to Mina. It's kind of the subtler version of the kind of devotion I see in Gomez to Morticia in The Addams Family. It's very much this, I love every single thing you do at every moment, and it's really sweet, and just this absolutely wonderful heroic version of Jonathan could not be more different than, David Manners in the Lugosi movie or Keanu Reeves in the Coppola movie. He's again imperfect. He withholds information from the group because he's traumatized and doesn't think they'll believe him, and that has some negative consequences, but he is just this really good-hearted, pure, loving person, and I love him so much. Favorite Jonathan. And Dracula, played by Skylar Silverlake, is a very interesting take on Dracula. So you've got the Lugosi accent going, which is always fun. Skylar's performance as Dracula is great. Everything else is a very, I guess, different take on Dracula, because when you build up the protagonists of your story so much and make them flawed but very likable people, I'd like to see Dracula be significantly more menacing. I don't find this Dracula especially menacing, but I do find him interesting. The one thing I will say I wasn't as much of a fan of is the outfit. It's not bad, it just doesn't have the elegance that I think this Dracula needs. The things that are really different here are, one, Dracula does not fear the cross in this. He's just like, that's just an item. It's a shape. But then they start looking through the different religious artifacts that Dr. Seward has in his collection, and they end up using the tears of a saint to kill Dracula. And I don't know what the rationale behind that choice is and why that works and not the cross. Maybe because the cross is just a shape and a symbol and these were directly from the body of a holy person. I don't know. A question that a lot of people would have when they read Dracula is, so why does Dracula want to go to London anyway? He's got this whole area in Transylvania where the population already fears him. They're superstitious, but I guess they'd more or less be easy pickings. So why would he go to London? My answer for that would be because the superstitious local Transylvanians know Dracula's a vampire and know to avoid him and to put up measures of protection against him. Whereas the modern people in London who are like, vampires, will not know what hit them. And he can very much lose himself in the crowd and, snack on people a lot easier that way. Why does he want to buy property there? Why doesn't he just stow away on the nearest ship? He can just sleep during the day and lurk in alleyways in the night. Why does he want to pose as human there? What's going on? And the thing I find really interesting about this version is that Dracula is asking himself the exact same question the whole time. When Jonathan talks about Dracula planning his departure, he mentions that Dracula was musing about his reason for leaving then, and when he visits Lucy, when he visits Renfield, when he sees different people throughout, and we hear him speak, every single time he's like, perhaps you are the reason I'm here. And then we find out what Dracula eventually concludes is the reason he's there. And it's interesting. I'm not going to say it completely works for me, because having the villain of the piece, if you see Dracula as the villain here, not really knowing why they're there, it undercuts the scariness of it, because in the original Dracula, you're like, what are Dracula's ulterior motives here? Does he have a rationale for moving to London besides just drinking people's blood and multiplying the vampire population? You always get this sense that Dracula's one step ahead of everyone. And in this, it feels like Dracula's very lost himself, but the ultimate reason we're given that he realizes does tie back in thematically to other things in this version, specifically relating to Lucy. So I thought that was neat. I'm still not sure whether or not I like it for the Dracula character, but it's definitely an interesting choice, and I thought it was really cool how it tied in thematically to other things happening with the characters in this version. I also like that this Dracula has just been isolated up in the Carpathians for so long, this presumably just hollow shell of a thing that was once a person, that he's just kind of like, is there a soul in there anymore? Can I feel things? And then as soon as he comes to England and starts interacting with people, he's just like, ah, yes, this feeling. I remember feeling this feeling. I can still feel this. This is cool. And that includes things like fear. I actually really liked that. Holmwood, played by, I believe it's Peter Pascoe, is very much the straight man of the group, so to speak. He's very, I don't know, he's a dull British guy, but he's played really, really well. He's always just like uptight about what is proper and what is not, and it's kind of the vibes that are given to Jonathan in a lot of versions of the story, but they're reserved for him, and I think they're really interesting. There's also the little interchange between him and Lucy that happens where she's dressed in men's clothing and is like, you can call me Quincy, and again, there might be implications there. And as for Van Helsing, there is no Van Helsing in this version. David talked about the reasons for not including Van Helsing a little bit towards the end of the interview I did with him and Steppy and Brittany for Carmilla the radio play. So if you want to go check that out, it'll probably be linked up in the cards somewhere if I haven't linked that already. And if you want to look towards the end, he'll talk a little bit about some of the choices he made in Wings of Dracula that I thought were really cool. Even though he's just kind of some guy they call in, Van Helsing tends to be pushed to the forefront in things like the Hammer movies and the Van Helsing movie that came out not long ago, and even the Ford Coppola movie. But as a friend of mine once said in school when we were showing a Dracula movie at the horror club I had there one time, Van Helsing's main character traits are, one, he knows everything, and two, he's Dutch. And that's like it. They dispose of him here, and what that does is they're up against the vampire, they have no idea what they're doing, and yet they still somehow manage to do it. And the way that's plotted out is really cool, because Jonathan has some inkling of what he's dealing with due to having been in Dracula's home for so long and having been bitten by him, but nobody else really knows what they're dealing with. So I think David said this in his interview too, Jonathan sort of kind of has to trick them into doing what needs to be done. In the very classic Lucy scene, he's just like, so we need to go to Lucy's crypt now just to make sure everything's all right. And they're just like, you're not suggesting, defiling her crypt. And he's just like, no. We just want to check the outside just to make sure it's okay and nobody's disturbed her grave or anything. And they're like, okay, that seems rational. And then they go over there again and they're just like, what do you mean we're going inside? And it's just like, it's the only way to make sure it hasn't been disturbed at all. Look, I have the keys. And it's just like, what are all those tools you're carrying, Jonathan? And it's just like, just some precautionary measures that I won't even have to use these, I hope. He persuades them to let him go further and further into the crypt to the point of opening her coffin, even though he initially said, of course I'm not going in there. He manages to make his way in there anyway, and I think that's brilliant. The other really interesting thing about this is the way the vampires work, because they open Lucy's crypt, and they're just like, oh, thank God her body's there. And then Lucy walks in with blood coming down from her lips, and is just like, hi guys, what's going on? Didn't expect to see all of you here. And they're just like, you're in there. You're still in there. I can see you in there, but you're also up there. What the hell is going on? And she's just like, I don't know. And the same thing with Dracula. So the vampires rise from their coffins while their bodies are still in the coffins. It's this very interesting take where the vampires kind of move separate from their bodies while still appearing completely corporeal and are completely capable of attacking people. It's this really interesting take. And there's also a neat little intermission with some Dracula trivia that happens. Yeah, so overall, takes some really interesting liberties with the story, but also understands the source material really well, which I also thought was very much the case with David's take on Carmilla. There are things that I'm still not sure whether or not they really worked for me, but most of this both kept the essence of the story intact and did things differently enough that it was really satisfying and interesting on pretty much every level, and I loved it, and I highly recommend it. If you want to see Wings of Dracula for yourself, I'm sure the script is out there, and you could get in contact with David about putting it on if you are capable of doing so. The only way I can think of you seeing this version is through a private link that David himself will give you. I can try and link his social medias so you can get in contact with him, and I'm sure that if you are interested and you would like to review it yourself, he would be more than happy to get in contact with you and talk about it, but I'm not him, so I can't say that for sure. I will link whatever relevant links for Wings of Dracula there are in the description below. That is my review of Wings of Dracula. Thank you for watching my video, and hopefully I'll see you in another one. Bye!